Hi, and welcome to my master's level research dissertation presentation. My name's Sarah Taylor, and I am a second year master's student on the MSc Counselling master's program at Bangor University. And I'm here to present to you my presentation, Melting Icebergs of the Mind, an exploration of climate anxiety and help-seeking behaviours. Now, my passion and interest in this particular area comes from the fact that my career path up until now has been very much focused on therapeutic outdoors activities and in the environment sector. So I'm bringing together my passions and interests in mental health, which I'm currently studying and training in, alongside my previous background in working therapeutically outdoors and in environmental settings. So this subject area is something I'm particularly passionate about. So I want to set the scene for you that we are currently all living in an era known as the Anthropocene. And our 6 billion year old planet Earth has never before seen a time like this, where scientists now observe the significant impacts human behaviours are having on planet Earth and the conditions and life on planet Earth. And this is why we are currently seeing scientific reports being released that advise that global temperatures rise no higher than 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released a recent report evidencing the impacts of climate change on human physical and mental health with very high confidence across all regions assessed. This sets the context and background for what this dissertation is going to be going further into around mental health. Surveying attitudes and concerns and worries over climate change is becoming ever more frequent. And for example, a survey conducted by the American Psychological Association found that over 50% of adults felt that climate change was a most critical modern concern. So climate change and mental health. Obviously, there's the direct effects of climate change impacting people, for example, where geophysical events are happening in their local areas, even things like involuntary migration, and the particular vulnerable groups that are affected by this. My handout talks a little bit more about this and research based on this important area, but the focus here is looking at how climate anxiety can have an indirect effect in terms of climate change, including in areas where no geophysical events have happened. And this is of increasing significance therapeutically, as the reports and evidence of the previous slide shows that the severity of events globally will be increasing over time, and also so will public awareness of this. The current research into climate anxiety itself is largely theoretical at this stage and brand new. And the term climate anxiety is even heavily disputed in terms of how to define this term, because it does encompass many complex different presentations and experiences psychologically and emotionally, but I will be using the blanket term climate anxiety throughout this presentation. So the presentation and nature of climate anxiety and the main components of this foundationally include an uncertainty and unpredictability over the future. So this is a unique form of anxiety because it is existential in nature, which is largely what the research currently discusses. There are, however, some similarities with other forms of anxiety in that the symptoms can present as panic attacks, for example, loss of appetite, rumination, and so on. But these symptoms are rarely recorded at clinically severe or high levels. And as I said earlier, this is a complex emotional presentation. For example, solastalgia, which is referred to by created by Albrecht, refers to the loss of environment, a mourning and a grieving process over the loss of a natural environment, either witnessed on TV at the other side of the world, perhaps looking at deforestation footage and the emotional implications that might have on an individual and their mental health, or indeed it might be an environment that has more personal significance in their local surroundings that they are mourning the loss of. This is just one example of the complications of climate anxiety as a concept. And there is a call out for more research into this as a distinctive and unique area of mental health. So climate anxiety and help-seeking behaviours, there is no current literature exploring the link between these two, hence the emergence of this study. However, I did find a study that looked at the direct impacts of climate change and its relationship with help-seeking. This involved studying those who have been influenced by involuntary migration due to climate change. And the results of this study showed that those individuals affected by this valued their mental health, but they were unlikely to seek support for this in comparison to seeking help for physical health needs, even in circumstances where there may be significant psychological trauma. Existing research into psychological help seeking concludes that self-stigma is a cross-cultural factor. It's something we see globally, and Vogel et al. Have studied this in detail. things such as not feeling worthy of seeking help or support, or social and cultural barriers to actually seeking out and having the confidence to access mental health support. So this is brand new research exploring the relationship between climate anxiety and help-seeking behaviour, and my aim for this dissertation was to contribute and begin to this new research to inform future studies and contribute to the development of appropriate and evidence-based interventions for climate anxiety. And so my hypothesis was that there will be a correlation between climate anxiety and help-seeking behaviours. So the methods used in this study. Well, there was a research team of 5 of us. We were all interested in our own unique areas. However, we did come together to gather this data using an online questionnaire presented in a Likert scale format using the program Qualitrix, which sent out a link to all relevant documentation for the participants involved. And this was done via opportunity sampling for adults over 18 from an international sample. We used Sona, social media, and word of mouth as platforms for this. And even in just a few weeks, we got 431 total participants in just a few weeks' time, which shows that quite a lot of people really do want to talk about their experiences of climate anxiety or their experiences of climate change. For my study, I used 2 existing measures with prior permission from the authors. Both authors have validated these studies themselves, the climate anxiety scale being one, and the self-stigma of seeking help scale being the other. No ethical issues were highlighted, and signposting and relevant information was provided to get consent, for example, from each participant before they took part in the study. So here is a screenshot of the questionnaire itself. Apologies, it's a little small. This is a screenshot from the climate anxiety scale itself, and as you can see, gathering ordinal data using the standard kind of ranking system of, for example, having a statement and then ranking your experience of it as never all the way through to almost always. An example I will read out for you from the climate anxiety scale is: thinking about climate change makes it difficult for me to concentrate. Thinking about climate change makes it difficult for me to sleep. So as you can see, these statements could relate to other forms of anxiety, but they've been tailored particularly for this exploration of climate anxiety. So it's a Likert scale format, 23 questions in total, and there were 11 demographic questions added on top of that. I highlighted a couple of these in my study, one of which I go into and mention in my handout. The other I highlight a little later on in these slides. So after cleaning the data from 431 participants down to 412, I ran a Spearman's rank correlation. I chose to do this because it's well suited to ordinal data where you're looking at pairings and relationships. So I basically totaled up the mean for each participant in relation to each scale that they answered the questions from. And what I found here, and what these scores show, is that there is a weak, negligible correlation between climate anxiety and stigma for help seeking, which was statistically insignificant. So interestingly, what was unique about this study is that we added 3 questions specifically related to counselling on climate anxiety. The majority of people had in fact received counselling, and when asked, have you ever discussed climate anxiety in counselling? The majority said no, but still an interesting amount, 17% said that they had spoken about climate anxiety in counselling. Would you consider having counselling for climate anxiety? Again, the majority said no, but nearly 32% did say yes, that they would consider this. So as I said earlier, I did draw out and highlight a couple of descriptive areas in my study, and I focused here on sex and the mean climate anxiety result in this particular graph. I wanted just to highlight that there is, as you can see under self-describe, which was allowing for those of non-binary gender identities or gender non-conforming identities to also disclose this. And you can see here that there is a noticeable peak in their overall experience of climate anxiety for this group compared to their binary gendered counterparts. For the help-seeking scale, again using means, overall means for each participant, this relationship was also explored with sex, and you can see there is a moderate increase in those who self-describe their sex. Nothing too significant, but still something we can observe. So what do these findings mean? So ultimately, the results illustrate that there is an insignificant relationship between individual experiences of climate anxiety and their resulting help-seeking behaviours. There's virtually no correlation between climate anxiety and self-stigma in help-seeking in this study, even though, as you remember, my hypothesis stated that there will be a correlation between help-seeking behaviour and climate anxiety, and I found virtually none in this particular study. However, there is an indication that a significant proportion of individuals would consider having counselling for their experiences of climate anxiety, and this is something that those 3 questions I showed to you earlier did show some interesting figures around this. Also, cultural diversity and marginal populations and potential psychological vulnerabilities in these areas and the unique experience of different populations are important factors to consider in experiences of climate anxiety and help seeking. So how do these findings support and enhance current theory and research, and what are the implications of this in the future? Well, these findings do corroborate with existing findings that show that high clinical levels of climate anxiety symptoms are rare. They also show that climate anxiety, when compared to other anxiety disorders, is pretty unique in how it presents, which also indicates that the help-seeking behaviours around this form of anxiety are also unique, and potentially the development of appropriate interventions as well needs to be tailored to this particular form of anxiety. It is existential in nature, as current literature shows, and this may be an appropriate explanation for how this is unique, and how particular interventions that consider this as being existential in nature rather than personal and pathological is an important component of the theory going forward. It contributes also to the theory that there is such a thing as climate denial or cultural silencing over talking about climate change. And that adds to the question, in that case, how do we work with this at a clinical level? And should it even be pathologized? So the descriptive data provides examples of psychological vulnerability and future learning that could be gleaned from this. So I captured data beyond the gender and sex binary, and in this particular context, those who self-describe their sex showed a significant increase in climate anxiety, as the graph earlier showed. Also, a moderate increase in help-seeking behaviours as well when compared to gender binary responses. So yes, obviously this isn't 8 people who self-describe their sex is not a substantial population sample to infer any generalisations here, but it does inform future studies and potentially looking into this area in more depth, and corroborates with the call out for more cross-cultural studies for climate anxiety, which Ajala et al. Refer to, and also is an example of psychological vulnerability. For example, those who identify as transgender and non-binary are a particularly psychological vulnerable population, as plenty of evidence shows. And there is actually some recent research in LGBTQ population and their experiences of climate change, their concern and worry about this, showing that they have got a high impact in terms of their own well-being around this and in terms of their worries, and also more alliance towards climate change beliefs when compared to their gender binary and heteronormative counterparts. So there is a little more information about the descriptive data and diversity in the handout if you're interested. So what do these findings contribute to the counselling field from a practical point of view? A continued adaptation and development of frameworks for cross-modality interventions, embedding this into therapeutic approaches and orientations across the board, basically. Because it's quite clear, particularly from the final 3 questions and the significant amount of people who answered these questionnaires, that people do want to talk about climate change and their experiences of this. It's also an opportunity for the therapeutic field to consider expansion and innovation. For example, looking at the work of the Climate Alliance and the activism, which is psychoanalytic in foundation, but also the work from multidisciplinary areas such as ecotherapy, outdoors-based therapy, the beautiful work that reconnects by Joanna Macy, which has been going for about 40 odd years now in the activist community and has a therapeutic leanings. Looking at the mental health benefits of pro-environmental behaviour change, and the literature in this is all really interesting and substantial and could lead to an expansion of therapeutic orientations and the settings and contexts in which this happens for something like climate anxiety. Training, of course, and awareness raising of climate change and climate awareness for counsellors would need to be something that is embedded, and also the multidisciplinary aspect, allowing counsellors to benefit from themselves as well, benefit from this themselves by also joining in the wider community, the wider debates around climate change, and bringing their therapeutic skills into a wider community setting. So future research, what kind of directions could this now take? Well, although this wasn't observed within this study in particular and wasn't necessarily the purpose of it, looking at clinically severe cases and diverse or vulnerable populations in relation to this and their unique experiences, case studies and social research could be really valuable here. Mixed methods, including qualitative methods and case studies again, to determine any barriers that exist to help seeking in this particular form of anxiety, and the continued contributions to be gathered from those applying mixed modality therapeutic practice, those who are working in multidisciplinary fields that can support climate anxiety. For example, researching the types of therapeutic process in group settings that are most effective and most suitable for climate anxiety. Also discovering how and when one-to-one interventions can be successfully applied for climate anxiety, and the monitoring and development of frameworks for upskilling, awareness raising, and training for counsellors themselves. So thank you very much for viewing this presentation. Please do remember to look at the handout for more context, background, and more detail about the findings of this study. It is a brand new study and innovative in its nature, and I look forward to seeing how this research develops in the future. I close by leaving you with a photograph from a therapeutic gardening project I was involved in, a very rewarding project a number of years ago, with the Growing Together NHS Reducing Social Isolation in Older People project. And for me, it is very close to my heart, the context of working outdoors and in varied settings that can be extremely therapeutic and supportive for individuals, particularly in community settings. And I'm curious to see how this field of research into climate anxiety and help seeking can develop, and whether working outside and the community element is something that really offers an opportunity for psychotherapy to expand its reach. Thank you very much for being present for my presentation.